When the first Knives Out film arrived back in 2019, it wasn't just named after a pretty fantastic Radiohead song, but it was a film that modernized the whodunit genre. It spun a very entertaining web of social themes and ideas, clashing headfirst with the tropes of classic films and detective novels. Rian Johnson created a playground where cliches and caricatures could run wild. And in my eyes, he successfully recaptured the thrill of the chase. Influences were not just worn on sleeves, but in full striking outfits and set pieces. The source was well and truly oozing out of its donut-shaped mystery. Homage is difficult to pull off in film, in a way that won't alienate the diehards and confuse the casuals, and without just blatantly ripping off the source material. But the Knives Out films incorporate so many influences. Those influences actually become the building blocks of the central mystery. And most importantly, their integration feels surprisingly organic and entertaining in a way that I don't think I've seen pulled off quite so successfully. We need more films like this because they celebrate the best of a genre whilst flipping the script. And so the formula has been refined. A series of unfortunate events with broad ensemble casts and plot lines that marry the best of Agatha Christie and Scooby-Doo. Revisiting the first film was an absolute joy. There is so much going on here, whether it's the endless amount of Easter eggs, the brilliant cinematography and staging, or the sweeping score. It's an addictive concoction of smug smiles and winks with a head-scratching mystery that keeps surprising. Glass Onion twisted the concept even further to admittedly slightly less entertaining results. The themes are laid on very thick here, perhaps to their detriment, but I found the central mystery just as, if not more compelling than the first film. Even if some of the characters start to wear thin by the end, there is still a lot to enjoy in this film, and it proved the formula is far from stale. Rian Johnson has said he wants each film to feel distinct, like a novel on the shelf, but they should say something. And of all three films, I think Wake Up Dead Man has the most to say. So, no spoilers, but the basic setup is, our story starts with Reverend Judd, played by Josh O'Connor, a Catholic priest who is sent to the church Our Lady of Perpetual Fortitude after he punches a deacon. I should mention, before becoming a priest, he was a boxer. Judd is very mild-mannered though, and he's told to assist Monsignor Jefferson Wicks, who's played by Josh Brolin, who has a much more aggressive style of preaching. They immediately clash, and then on Good Friday, Wicks is murdered whilst taking a break during his sermon. And we have a locked room mystery. If you're interested in some of these specific influences on this one, Johnson has said John Dixon Carr, Edgar Allan Poe, and of course, Agatha Christie, but also Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. And this film does take its time before we get to Daniel Craig's Benoit Blanc, and he doesn't really feel like a protagonist here, even once he arrives. He was such a major part of Glass Onion, but here he feels more like a distant intrusion. A voice of reason that is constantly drowned out by the politics, which isn't an issue at all because the real miracle of this film is Josh O'Connor's performance. In fact, it might be my favorite performance of his. His fragile wit heartily boosts this script up, and for the film he is in, his character is wonderfully earnest. It's a very compelling performance, and he becomes the soul of this film. He is the fundamentals of the belief system this film pokes and prods at. A key theme throughout this film is redemption, and Reverend Judd is the anchor for us in a place where corruption and control are seen at every corner. This film doesn't just push the boundaries of logic, but Reverend Judd's own belief system. And once the game's afoot, he is a great counter to Benoit Blanc. The verbal joust that takes place the moment they meet for the first time is one of my favorite scenes in the film, because as a pairing, you have logic versus faith, and they are both so adamant in their beliefs. I do wish the film spent even more time with them together, because it really is like watching the brain and the heart have a conversation. The rest of the cast are a typical Knives Out circle of misfits, each with a dark secret and a hidden motive. Andrew Scott is particularly great as the science fiction author. Glenn Close is a great haunting presence as Martha, Wick's right-hand woman. Josh Brolin is brilliant as the brash, begrudging ringleader. You really feel the venom in a lot of his words. And of course, Daniel Craig as Benoit Blanc is always grinning in anticipation, carrying that irresistible energy of a smug detective. He has never been more in awe of himself here. His cheeky arrogance is so much fun to watch, especially when he is overcome with surprise. And to touch on the technical, the camera lingers just enough here for you to second guess the gaze of a frame. The staging and placement of a lot of the characters and set pieces is always so well thought out in these films. They create frames with such depth. There is a sweeping motion to the camera at times, almost like Benoit Blanc is pointing at something and the camera feels the need to mimic his euphoric energy. There are so many editing choices that just drum up the intrigue here. I think it's a very well cut together film, despite some gripes I'll discuss in a minute. But the lighting is the cherry on top, especially when they're in the church. It's a great visual storytelling technique to have the clouds block the sun coming in through the windows as the conversation shifts. It's even more impactful than it sounds. However, I do think the central mystery and the film's pacing might be the weakest of the three films. And in the true sense of a donut, I think something is missing at the center of this film. I think it has a masterful setup. The first 40 minutes or so of this film is tight, funny, and engrossing. And then once we get into the weeds of the mystery, its pacing gets a bit shaky. I think the themes are prominent but not exhausting like they were in Glass Onion, but I think this film has the best characters and some of the best interactions between characters. And I really like a lot of what this film has to say. It really gets quite poignant at times, and it carries a much more emotional weight to it than the other films did. But whenever the film spends a significant amount of time on its central mystery and clue counting, I did start to lose interest, to the point where I actually felt like I could breathe again once the mystery was solved and we got back to spending some time with the characters to wrap everything up. It gets sticky, its exposition starts to spill a bit all over the place, and whether you want to call that oozing with style or a critical wound of the format is up to you, because I think it's a winning formula, but the mystery didn't pull me in the way the other films did, so a lot of the dramatic flair attached didn't strike the right chord with me, and it did test my patience at times. There's a big but to all this though, because I think the films have great rewatch value, and I enjoyed Glass Onion even more the second time round. But for this film, the initial intrigue wasn't there. I think it could lose about 15, maybe even 20 minutes of runtime to tighten up the pacing. It's 2 hours and 24 minutes, it's the longest of the three. And without spoiling anything, I think the impact of the mystery is lost in its over-explanation. The other two films felt like they had a finer balance of this, and I also felt like I had a pretty good idea of where this film was going a bit earlier than I should have. But maybe I was just hoping for a bigger twist on the locked room concept. One plot device I did particularly enjoy though was the use of an influencer character that is always recording things on his phone. These films have a lot of smoke and mirrors, and the idea of it all being constantly undone by the presence of a phone camera is a really fun subversion tactic. It raises a lot more questions in a scene, and I thought it was integrated really well into the plot. But despite my issues with the mystery, I think this film is just as much fun as the previous two. And I really do mean it when I say we need more films like this that are not afraid to embrace genre and convention and have fun with it. These films don't reinvent the wheel, they just take it off-roading. And it's so nice to watch a film that's littered with Easter eggs that don't insult the audience's intelligence. These films make the in-jokes accessible, and despite my personal gripes with the case, the world it's set in and the style with which this film is delivered will always keep me coming back. This is currently having a limited theatrical release but arrives on Netflix on the 12th of December. Please do give it a watch and let me know what you think of the film in the comments. Please also consider subscribing. I recently made a video about the London Film Festival, which featured this film actually as its opening night gala, even though I didn't attend that screening. But you can check out my thoughts on the other 19 films I did see at the film festival if you want to. A lot of those will be coming out in the next few weeks. But all that's left to do now is to thank you very much for watching.